Welcome to the deep dive. If you've paid any attention to health trends lately, you've definitely heard about intermittent fasting, or IF. It's everywhere. People talk about it like it's this, magic bullet for weight loss, brain power, everything. So today we're doing our deep dive. We've gathered a whole stack of research reviews, studies, and we're going to really figure out what intermittent fasting actually is. What does it do to your body? What are the real benefits? And maybe just as importantly, what are the potential downsides, especially thinking about weight loss and muscle?
Exactly. The goal here is to cut through the hype, synthesize the science, and give you a clear picture so you can decide if it's something that, makes sense for you.
Okay, let's jump right in then. What exactly is intermittent fasting? Seems simple, but maybe it's not.
Well, at its core, it is fairly simple. It's not about what foods you're eating like a typical diet. It's an eating pattern focused on when you eat. Yeah. So you cycle between periods of eating and periods of, voluntary fasting.
Okay, so different from just cutting calories every day.
Right. That's traditional caloric restriction, or CR, just eating less overall, consistently. NF is more about having dedicated times where you consume very little or nothing at all. The timing is the key difference.
And there isn't just one way to do IF, is there? I hear about different schedules.
No, definitely not. There are several popular methods people use. Probably the most common one you hear about is time-restricted eating, or TRE. That's where you limit your eating to a specific window each day. The 168 method is a classic example.
Right, 16 hours fasting, 8 hours eating.
Exactly. Fast for 16, eat within an 8-hour window. Some people do shorter windows too, like maybe a 6-hour eating window. Then you've got the 5.2 method, sometimes called twice per week fasting.
Okay, how does that work?
You eat normally 5 days a week, but on the other 2 days, and they don't have to be consecutive, you really restrict calories, usually down to maybe 500 or 600 calories, something like that. So very low energy intake on those 2 days. And another main one is alternate day fasting, ADF, or its modified version, MADF.
So one day on, one day off?
Pretty much. You alternate between days of normal eating and days of complete fasting, or, again, very low-calorie intake, like in the 5.2 method. There are other types, too, like whole-day fasts done occasionally, or even longer periodic fasts, but TRE, 5.2, and ADF are the big ones we see studied most often.
It's really interesting, though, because while this feels very trendy very now, fasting itself is ancient, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's not new at all. Fasting has been practiced for, millennia.
Yeah.
Across different cultures, religions, for healing, for mental clarity, spiritual reasons.
Yeah, I was reading about figures like Hippocrates, the father of medicine, saying things like, to eat when you are sick is to feed your illness.
Right, and Plutarch suggested fasting over medicine sometimes. Even Benjamin Franklin called resting and fasting the best medicine. So there's a long history here. It's not just a modern fad.
So why does it work? What's happening inside the body when you switch between eating and fasting? You mentioned a switch.
Yes, the metabolic switch. That's really the core mechanism scientists talk about. Think of your body having sort of two main fuel options. Normally, in the fed state, when you're eating regularly, your body runs primarily on glucose from carbs. Insulin is high, telling your body to use that sugar for energy and store the rest, often as fat. But after you haven't eaten for a while, typically maybe 10, 12 hours or more, your stored glucose in the liver starts running low.
Okay.
That's when the switch happens. Your body shifts from burning glucose to burning stored fat. The liver breaks down fatty acids into ketone bodies.
Ketones, I've heard that term.
Right. Beta-hydroxybutyrate is a key one. These ketones then become a major fuel source, especially for the brain, which loves them.
Yeah.
And the hormone glucagon becomes more dominant, signaling fat release. This switch is really important because it lets you tap into fat stores while helping to preserve muscle.
So if I'm eating breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacks, I might never really flip that switch. I'm always in glucose burning mode.
Potentially, yes. Your ketone levels might stay pretty low. But with IF patterns like 5.2 or ADF, you deliberately push your body into that ketone burning state on the fasting days.
And even with daily time-restricted eating like 168.
Even then, that daily 16-hour fast gives your body a chance to deplete glycogen and start producing ketones every single day between your eating windows. It makes your metabolism more flexible.
And this switch does more than just change fuel sources, right? You mentioned cellular benefits.
Exactly. It triggers some really important stuff at the cellular level. One key thing is autophagy.
Autophagy. Sounds technical.
It just means self-eating. It's basically your cell's internal recycling program. When you fast and ketones rise, it activates pathways that tell cells to clear out old, damaged proteins and components like worn-out mitochondria or the cell's power plants. It's like a deep clean.
So fasting helps your cells clean house.
That's a great way to think about it. This process is linked to better mitochondrial function and overall cellular health. The metabolic switch also affects other pathways, like mTOR, which is involved in growth. Inhibiting it slightly can also boost autophagy and mitochondrial production. Plus, the ketones themselves, like beta-hydroxybutyrate, aren't just fuel. They act as signaling molecules. They can influence gene expression, reduce oxidative stress, think cellular rust, and even promote factors like BDNF,
DNF.
brain-derived neurotrophic factors, like fertilizer for your brain cells, supporting their growth and survival. So potential brain benefits, too.
And how does this tie into our internal body clock, our circadian rhythm? You hear a lot about that.
That's another important angle. Our circadian rhythm coordinates pretty much all our bodily processes, including metabolism, when to build, when to break down. Eating constantly, or especially late at night, can disrupt this rhythm. Intermittent fasting, particularly time-restricted eating where you have consistent eating and fasting windows, can help reinforce a healthy circadian rhythm. Keeping that clock synchronized is crucial for metabolic health, preventing things like insulin resistance and hormonal imbalances.
Okay, so the mechanism is fascinating. It's this metabolic switch, triggering cellular cleanup and potentially helping our body clocks. But what does the research actually show in terms of results for people? Let's talk weight loss first.
Right, the big one. ETRF definitely works for weight loss for many people.
Yeah.
Often, it's simply because restricting when you eat makes it easier to eat less overall. You naturally reduce your calorie intake without meticulous counting.
So it's mainly about the calories.
In many studies, yes. When researchers compare IF to traditional continuous calorie restriction, CR, and they make sure both groups eat the same number of calories, the weight loss is often very similar. IF isn't necessarily magic in that sense.
But it is effective.
Oh, absolutely. Studies show significant reductions in fat mass with IF. We're talking maybe a kilogram or so short-term and potentially 1.5% body fat loss and a couple of centimeters off the waist long-term compared to controls. Modified alternate day fasting seems particularly good for fat loss. And losing fat, especially that deeper visceral fat, is key. It improves hormones like leptin and adiponectin, which help control appetite. Interestingly, one study found combining IF with CR led to even more weight loss over a year than CR alone. So there might be some synergy there sometimes.
What about blood sugar and insulin? That seems to be a huge area for IF.
It really is. This is where IF often shines. Studies consistently show improvements in insulin sensitivity.
Meaning your body responds better to insulin.
Exactly. Your cells aren't as resistant to insulin's signal to take up glucose. We see significant drops in fasting insulin levels and OMA-IR scores, which measure insulin resistance. These improvements seem quite robust, especially in studies lasting several months.
I've heard about eating earlier in the day being particularly good for this early time-restricted feeding.
Yes, ETRF. Eating your meals earlier in the day and finishing earlier, say by mid-afternoon. Some studies on this are quite striking. They've shown dramatic improvements in insulin sensitivity and the function of insulin-producing cells in people with prediabetes.
Even without losing much weight.
That's the fascinating part. Yes, even independent of significant weight loss in some cases. It suggests that timing itself really matters for metabolic health. ETRF can also lower fasting blood glucose, especially in people with obesity. Now, for type 2 diabetes, it's a useful tool.
Yeah.
Studies show benefits, but it's maybe not clearly superior to standard calorie restriction for blood sugar control in all trials. But it's definitely a comparable and effective alternative, which is great for people who find daily dieting hard.
Okay, so weight loss, better insulin sensitivity. What about heart health? Cholesterol, blood pressure?
Yeah, there are positive signals there too. EF can lead to improvements in lipid profiles, lowering LDL, the bad cholesterol, total cholesterol, triglycerides, and sometimes it raises HDL, the good cholesterol.
And blood pressure.
Potential benefits there as well. It might be linked to activating the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest system, and maybe that BDNF increase we talk about. Early TRE might also help the body handle salt better. Plus, IF seems to have anti-inflammatory effects. We see reductions in inflammatory markers like IL-6, at least short-term. And it boosts adiponectin, a hormone from fat cells that's actually anti-inflammatory and protects against artery hardening.
All right, so lots of potential upsides, but it can't be perfect. What are the downsides or challenges people should be aware of?
No, definitely not perfect, and it's not for everyone. One common challenge is simply adherence and side effects, especially at first. People starting IF might report feeling hungrier or more fatigued than with continuous dieting.
Does everyone stick with it?
Adherence varies. Some find TRE patterns like 168 relatively easy to stick to, maybe even easier than daily calorie counting. Other patterns, maybe like a 14.10 LTRE in one study, actually had lower adherence than control groups. It really depends on the person and the specific protocol.
And side effects.
Yeah, common ones reported, particularly during the adjustment phase, include things like dizziness, sometimes nausea, headaches, maybe some digestive upset like diarrhea, usually temporary, but can be unpleasant. A more serious concern, though, is the risk of hypoglycemia or low blood sugar.
That sounds risky.
It can be, especially for people with diabetes who are on medications that lower blood sugar. Combining those meds with fasting needs careful medical supervision. Severe hypo episodes can cause falls, fractures, even serious cardiovascular events in vulnerable people.
And we don't know much about long-term risks.
That's a key limitation. Most studies looking at side effects are relatively short, weeks or months. So the picture of potential risks over many years is still, developing. Caution is definitely needed for certain groups.
Okay, that leads us to a really critical point for many people. Muscle mass. There's a lot of debate here. Is IF good or bad for keeping or building muscle?
Yeah, this is a really important and, frankly, somewhat controversial area. There's what you might call a muscle-centric view that argues IF might be suboptimal for muscle.
Why is that?
Several reasons. First, insulin. While high insulin isn't always great, it does have an anti-catabolic effect on muscle. It helps prevent muscle breakdown. IF periods naturally lower insulin. Second, muscle protein synthesis, or MPS, the building process. It's mainly triggered by protein intake, specifically amino acids. But there seems to be a limit to how much MPS you can stimulate with a single meal, often called the muscle full effect.
Meaning you can only build so much muscle after one meal, no matter how big.
Kind of. The MPS response seems to peak and last for maybe 3 to 5 hours. So if you're cramming all your protein into 1 or 2 large meals within a short IF window, you might not be stimulating MPS as frequently throughout the day compared to spreading protein intake out.
So longer fasts mean fewer opportunities to trigger muscle building.
That's the concern. And during those longer fasting periods, the body might be more inclined to oxidize amino acids for energy instead of using them for repair and growth. It's like a missed opportunity for muscle building with each skipped meal window.
But don't some studies show IF preserves muscle just fine?
Some do, yes.
Yeah.
Especially when comparing IF to standard calorie restriction, they often find similar changes in fat-free mass, FFM. However, FFM isn't just muscle. It includes water, organs, etc. A fairly large recent study that specifically looked at appendicular FFM, basically limb muscle mass, a better proxy for skeletal muscle, actually found a reduction in muscle mass with time-restricted eating over 12 weeks compared to a control group eating normally throughout the day.
So it's not clear-cut. Does this matter more for certain people?
It likely does. The concern might be greater for individuals who already struggle to maintain or build muscle, a state sometimes called anabolic resistance. Think older adults or people who are sedentary and carrying excess weight. Their muscles might be less responsive to protein intake to begin with, so the IF pattern could potentially make things worse.
So if someone is doing IF but really wants to prioritize muscle, any advice based on this?
Yes. If muscle is a top priority, the research suggests focusing on 2 things within your eating window. First, ensure adequate total daily protein, aiming for at least 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight, seems prudent based on general muscle research. Second, try to distribute that protein intake across maybe 2-3 meals within your eating window, ideally separated by about 3 to 5 hours to maximize those MPS spikes.
And longer fasts are probably riskier for muscle.
Logically, yes. Whole day fasting or alternate day fasting with those very long periods without protein intake and potentially larger calorie deficits would likely pose a greater challenge to muscle preservation than a typical TRE like 168.
Good to know. And just touching on the research overall, any general limitations we should keep in mind when looking at IF studies?
Definitely. As I mentioned, a big one is the lack of really long-term trials spanning many years. We need more data on the effects over a decade or more. There's also inconsistency in how studies measure things like body composition, making it hard to compare results directly. And the challenge of blinding participants always know if they're fasting or not, which can introduce bias. People might change other behaviors or have expectations that influence outcomes. So the certainty of evidence varies quite a bit depending on the specific outcome we're looking at.
Okay, so wrapping this all up, what's the take-home message for you, the listener? Intermittent fasting. It clearly has some strong points, right? Especially for fat loss, insulin sensitivity.
Absolutely. The metabolic benefits are compelling based on current evidence. The metabolic switch, autophagy, potential circadian rhythm benefits. These are real physiological effects.
That's not a magic wand. It comes with trade-offs. potential side effects, the adherence question, and this really important nuance around muscle health.
Exactly. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And remember, no single diet works for everyone long-term. Often the best diet is the one you can actually stick to consistently. AV is one tool, a potentially powerful one, but just one tool in the toolbox. Understanding how it works helps you decide if it's the right tool for you.
So maybe the final thought for you listening is this. When considering intermittent fasting, step back and ask, what's my main health goal right now? Is it weight loss, better blood sugar, athletic performance, maintaining muscle as I age? And then how might you fit into that specific mission, considering both its strengths and its potential drawbacks?
Well said. It requires that kind of personalized thinking.
Definitely food for thought. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope this helps you navigate the world of intermittent fasting with a bit more clarity.